Many thanks for joining us, dear viewers. This is our weekly program, Future Africa. Nicholas, thank you very much for joining me and welcome to this program.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here and happy to talk with you today on all affairs regarding Ethiopia and East Africa. And thank you for having me.
Great. Just to start with Nicholas Day, please introduce yourself a little bit and then we'll proceed to our today's agenda.
Well, I started out as an artist myself. I am a ballet dancer originally, and I've danced in Germany, France, and now currently living in Montreal, Canada, and I've danced here too. And in the meantime, while I've been doing that, I set up my own nonprofit organization, both here in Canada and in Kenya, called Artists Alliance for Africa, which is an alliance of artists which are aiming to help build artistic academies for people in need or people that don't have the privileges that we have here in the West. So we're working on this, and we've been working with children in Kenya's slums and trying to get outreach to places where they need it. So this is something that we started 4 years ago. And on top of that, also in my spare time, I'm an analyst on African affairs, and I spend a lot of time studying African affairs and African history and culture. I'm a big fan of Sheikh Anta Diop, who's a famous historian from Senegal, who was a famous Egyptologist and wrote many famous books on Africa's origins and civilizations before colonialism, which have opened my mind to all sorts of inconsistencies in history. And I guess that's what brings me here today. My studies in African affairs mostly, and all things related to that.
What is your understanding about the current situation in this country, Ethiopia?
I use independent analysts. Right now, I listen to people like Larry Freeman. I'm also working with the Rising Tide Foundation as an advisor, and we share a lot of information on the situation out in Ethiopia, especially in the northern part with Tigray and the TPLF, and also what's happening with Eritrea. And not only that, we in the Rising Tide Foundation, especially, we spend a lot of time studying Africa and looking at other regions of the country, of the continent as well, and seeing why conflicts happen, what is the nature of these conflicts, who is standing to gain from these conflicts. I mean, I think in the 21st century, the way the world is today, we really have to think, regardless of what media you're watching, it's very important to use your own brain and to use your own ability to critique something to see if what kind of level of truth it stands on. So, but yes, personally, I go to more independent analysts. I look at YouTube a lot, and I try and find Ethiopian journalists such as yourself on the ground to get my reporting from and to get my information from. Otherwise, it just gets distorted, and we end up with a muddy picture often.
In general, how do you evaluate the US Africa, the US Ethiopia policy?
US Africa policy has been one of, call it a Jekyll and Hyde relationship. It's kind of a two-faced character. I think nowadays, especially with America, like most countries in the past 50 years, are dealing with America or a United States of America that doesn't necessarily have its core interests at heart or like the core principles of why that nation was begun as an opposite to the oligarchical empires of Europe. The USA's policy in the past 50 years in relations to Africa has completely changed, and it's become one of oppression largely, or at least it's a policy of status quo. So it's more intended to keep Africa in this vicious circle of non-development and poverty, and also to keep the countries of that continent in a constant kind of military posturing with each other. And none of the countries stand to gain much from that. I mean, we already saw in the 80s the results of certain genocides that took place on the African continent, and we don't need to hash those out today. But we can already see the devastation caused by supplying these countries with weaponry when, we should have been supplying them with hard machinery to build developmental infrastructure to get people's standard of living up to a certain level so that they can live a certain life of dignity. But we haven't done that. And so now, in current times, America seems to be implementing a policy of regime change. And it doesn't seem to be too happy with Abiy Ahmed's democratically elected government. The Western media is going to make sure it looks like it's sitting on the fence, but that's certainly not the case. It often does the diplomatic approach of making, like the British Empire developed this. Like it's very impressive how the art of diplomacy makes it look like the West is not interfering or not aiming to have kind of any specific ends or agenda. But if people read the language carefully, it's very much favoring the TPLF and almost calling for, this TPLF, like it's got no grounds to challenge the democratically elected government of Ethiopia, which has been voted not just by the people of Tigray, but every single region in Ethiopia. So if they're going to have that discussion, again, that discussion needs to happen with every single region, not just with one which wants to break away or whatever. That's the thing. The media doesn't seem to spell out the objective of the TPLF very clearly. But after this meeting that took place, I don't know, I'm sure you saw this meeting between Western diplomats that took place the other day, where they were literally talking without, Abiy Ahmed's government is not representative in this meeting. They are talking with a separatist faction about, causing civil war. And after that, basically toppling the democratically elected government of Ethiopia. And that is a precursor to regime change. I mean, there's no other way of saying it. It's just Western people are like Western diplomats today are so good at putting, like I say, Jekyll and Hyde face on everything. And they wear a mask always, and they come like Casanova in the night and take away all your goodwill. So yeah, it's a challenge to say the least, but it looks like Ethiopia is standing strong.
How do you see the determination of the leadership of Dr. Abiy Ahmed in resisting the Western pressure upon this camp?
Oh, so far it's been simply, it's been brilliant. For anybody who's actually been watching the protests, there are enormous protests taking place in Ethiopia and around in other cities of the world now, where Ethiopians are standing up and showing their voices. Their voices are being heard. That's the first thing, which is very important, to show the support for the Ethiopian government. Abiy Ahmed has enormous amounts of support, and when he won the election, he won with a significant majority. This is more than most Western leaders can say today. And the resistance has been astounding. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that this, as far as the TPLF have gotten, that is as far as they will get now. And ever since I can't remember the city that they managed to reach, it was about 160 kilometers from Addis Ababa. But since Abiy Ahmed went to the front lines and started leading his forces directly himself, it swung the situation in the government's army and has completely overturned the situation to one where it doesn't look like this will last too long. I mean, I don't think the TPLF has the strength or the how would you say, the firepower to really cause a significant problem for the Ethiopian government. I think what was the issue was that they were trying to create a situation where Western forces could intervene. Now, if they had got NATO intervention like happened in Libya or something like this is the only way that these rebel factions can find a way to topple governments, and they have to use Western military to do it. Without that firepower, there would be no chance of overturning the government of Ethiopia. They have to use force, is my point. They always have to use military force, and they could never do it by calling another election, because they know if they call another election, Abiy Ahmed will win, and they'll get the same result, because the people support development, they don't support poverty. And that is where the resistance lies. The people are perfectly aware of what Abiy Ahmed is trying to do, they're perfectly also aware of what America is trying to do. And I also think they're perfectly aware of what China's trying to do. And that now most people on the African continent can see the difference in foreign policy between the People's Republic of China and the Republic of the United States of America. There is a significant difference in the foreign policy of those two nations, and Ethiopia has chosen, on an independent, sovereign level, being the only country who was never colonized, in the same form and in the same fashion, thankfully, for the rest of Africa. Because if it wasn't for Ethiopia, I really believe that the future of Africa as a continent for hope rests largely with what happens with Ethiopia now and the result of this regime change operation, which right now is largely unsuccessful, as I was saying.
The Prime Minister is now returning to office after successfully accomplishing the first phase victory over the terrorist TPLF group. And what is your reflection on his decision to join the army in person at the battlefront?
Abiy Ahmed is a sovereign leader of a sovereign nation. He is an independent mind, and he intends to lead Ethiopia with an independent mind, and this is valiant. But the statement of him going to the front lines like this, what it shows to people like Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin, whoever out there, Xi Jinping, Modi, some of the bigger leaders in the world, is that this is a man who, he has a nation of 120 million people supporting him or behind him, and Ethiopia potentially in the future has the potential to become a superpower in the sense of on the African continent in terms of population and its economic power. It certainly has the potential to do this, and this statement of showing up on the front lines, it just shows as a character he's not afraid to put himself in harm's way. He's not afraid to stand up and literally put himself in the position where he is going to be the returning fire against his enemy. And I think it shows Western forces especially that he's not playing around, which is important, because with other leaders in the past, when regime change suddenly starts to be put onto their nations and they suddenly start to see the policy change, the foreign policy from the West starts to change towards their nation, they often do something where they maybe run and hide or try and lock themselves up in a palace and see if they just wait and if take some time, things will just pass, right? And I think that was Gaddafi a little bit. He thought, if I just hide and things will pass, or we'll manage to get through this. But that's not the case. When NATO starts coming for you, they're going to bring the cavalry, as we say. So they're not going to hold back, and they certainly didn't hold back in Libya. And I think he realized he needs to stand up and show them that he's willing to put himself right in the position where he will be in a precarious situation. But at the same time, it's exactly where he needs to be, to show those people that he's not playing around, he's not taking chances, and that he is willing to essentially, put his morals where his mouth is, so to speak, and really act on his principles. And it's valiant. It's really it's helped turn the entire essence of the situation in favor of the Ethiopian government. And really now, I don't think it will be long before we have a resolution.
After the Prime Minister of Ethiopia joined the army, the National Defense Force of Ethiopia has showed a total shift in registering an amazing victory over the rebels and liberating many towns that was invaded by the terrorist TPLA. What is your reflection about this?
Well, this doesn't surprise me. Abiy Ahmed is a perfectly resolute and dignified and capable leader. He seems to have a good understanding of strategy. Any leader who is a good leader often is prepared, has been prepared to be a good leader, either by themselves for a process of intense self-development, and knowing that one day they would become some form of leader, and so they needed to prepare for this moment. And Abiy Ahmed is no different in that sense. He is certainly a guy who is ready for the job at hand, and I think it's not just in his ability to turn around the effect of the army, which was done so efficiently in such a short amount of time, but also his ability to turn around the fortunes of the nation. I mean, since he has become prime minister, everything regarding development has gone into high speed. And the train in Ethiopia, the electrified train from Djibouti to Addis Ababa, was finished on schedule, on time. It is electrified. It is one of the first of its kind in Africa. Ethiopia, since and I know this was begun already before Abiy Ahmed was in government, but he made sure that these things got finished and on time, and he clearly has a plan. Now, since then, he has had the challenge of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and trying to fix all the diplomatic problems with that regarding Egypt and Sudan. And so far, though there hasn't been a conclusion to that, like, he has been successful in organizing the regional leaders into some form of agreement. Now, it's not conclusive, like I said, and there's still more to be seen, still more work to be done, but it's extremely tricky and complex issue, because we're talking about the water source of the Nile River, which is an extremely powerful water source of it's a source of life for those three nations and other nations down the river. But in terms of his military strategy, it was immediate. As soon as he went to the front lines, the morale, you could say, of the army was lifted in a way which few others can do. When your leader comes to direct you from the front, this of course lifts the morale. And not just that, I'm sure the strategy took a lift as well, and he had some ideas that were brought to the front and definitely helped turn the tide in this operation against what is now very fast becoming a terrorist faction in Ethiopia. And we hope with this turning of the tides that the TPLF realizes that they don't stand to gain much by using force and oppression to get the results that they're looking for. They're going to have to come to a more diplomatic protocol and try and follow it out that way, because I don't like the reports I'm hearing of human rights abuses that are taking place in the regions in the north of Ethiopia where the TPLF are ruling currently.
The US is working against the interest of 100 plus million people of Ethiopia, because the Ethiopians are elected their governments, their leadership in a very democratic way. Why they are working against the interest of the people of Ethiopia in general?
Well, independently, Ethiopia stands for pro-development. It has a pro-development policy right now where they are building infrastructure, and they have a clear intention to lift the standard of living and the standard of the economy in Ethiopia. Now, this provides a bit of a problem for the West, because as we all know, since the days of colonialism, Western powers have used Africa as a natural resource base to go and pillage and take the resources that we need. Still, in parts of Africa, most of the mining operations that take place in Africa are owned by Western mining companies like Glencore and Rio Tinto. Those are just to name a few. And of course, when the West starts seeing a country or a nation like Ethiopia becoming so strong in its ability to enact a certain kind of policy, which will not just lift Ethiopia out of poverty, but we have to look to Kenya and Tanzania and other countries in the region, and Egypt as well, and see how they are also taking a policy of pro-development, and they are building a lot of infrastructure right now, which is lifting a lot of people out of poverty and lifting the standard of living. And really, it's providing a lot of jobs. So the fact of the matter is that Ethiopia stands as a potent example of what can be done in such a short amount of time when you have a leader like Abiy Ahmed, who's willing to put himself in harm's way and take chances and do provocative things like building the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which will be the largest hydropower dam that Africa has ever seen built on the continent. Now, these are provocative acts to take, especially when, like I said before, you have a Western power that is not interested in pro-development policies, but is more interested in status quo policies, keeping Africa rooted to the spot it has been for the past 100 years, and making sure that they don't get so developed that they'll be able to develop those natural resources for themselves and for their own wealth and benefit, rather than for the wealth of the benefit of the Western corporations that continue to mine and pillage these resources from the continent and from the grounds of the continent, without ever thinking of the African people and their plight, and without ever paying back any dues or any customs or any taxes or on these products. Like, they are literally just taking them out of these countries because of low levels of governance and enormous amounts of corruption that go on. But this is largely happening because the people don't have development. They don't even have roads in some places, especially if we're talking like countries like Congo, which just do not have the ability to defend their country in a way that Ethiopia can, per se.
The United States of America, the US threatening Ethiopia for an economic sanctions, and also extended this sanction on Eritrea, the neighboring country, in connection with the war or conflict in the northern part of Ethiopia in the Tigray region. And is the US working to start the growing relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea as well as the Horn of African countries?
Yeah, I mean, it's typical. Like, we've seen it time and again. It's the same policy reenacted. So we are watching the same play, the same scene of a play, the same tragedy take place every time. They follow the same policy with Iran. So whenever Iran tries to follow its own independent policy, especially with energy, Iran time and again has said that they are not developing nuclear power for nuclear weapons. They're developing nuclear power for nuclear power to be able to have nuclear energy, which would be beneficial to their nation. But of course, the West doesn't want any country to have nuclear power, because that is real energy that is going to give you real productive potential to build an industry, to build a nation from the ground up. And the West has no intention of allowing Africans to follow their own energy policy. I really come back to the fact of economics. Economics is the reason why we don't, why Western people or Western bureaucrats or Western governments would not want to see Africa follow its own independent policies, because we are dependent on Africa as a resource base. And if Africa follows its own policy of economic development, they will not be dependent on Western powers anymore for aid or for charity or for loans, and instead will be able to use their own industry to develop themselves and have their own tax base to spend on their own infrastructure, and will have their own banks to give out loans and credit to build their own infrastructure or to develop research and development in technology and science, or to set up science data centers, or like right now virology departments would be a good idea, or like something like a global health database or infrastructure plan for Africa of some sort. So these are the kind of policies that we could be working on, especially just that we had a pandemic. The West could be building hospitals all over Africa, and could have taken a policy of developing Africa and spending enormous amounts of credit, like Roosevelt did in the New Deal in America, to get Americans out of depression. We could do the same thing with Africa, and instead of regime change in Ethiopia, why don't we spend our money on development and bringing water to the 400 million people in Africa that don't have access to it, or bringing electricity to the 800 million people in Africa that don't have access to it, or we can go on and on and on about all of the wars that we should be fighting: the war against poverty, the war against water scarcity, the war against lack of education, illiteracy that is prominent across the African continent. There are all these things that we should be fighting a war against, but no, we want to fight a war against a government which is trying to change these things, that is trying to lead Africans and Ethiopians alike out of this situation. And so, of course, economic sanctions was the first thing they were going to do. TPLF were in power for a long time in Ethiopia. They should remember well that diplomacy is the path forward, not Western intervention. And they should remember well what happened to other countries when they invited Western intervention, because it didn't turn out so great. If they really care about their people, they will talk with the government instead of inviting sanctions on their own people.
Why the US is currently supporting the terrorist TPLF while the democratically elected government is in place in Ethiopia?
Well, it's an insert to regime change, so it wouldn't have mattered whether it's the TPLF or someone else. The government, the Western powers or the Western diplomats or the ambassadors of these countries and the talking heads that they are, they just need any faction to represent that which that follows the narrative of like a kind of rebellious group of people that are screaming about human rights. And so as long as they have this as an image, then it gives off the image that Ethiopia is an oppressive nation, right? And it gives off the image that the government is already oppressive from the outset, because they just need to have a small group of people, a minority, to make it look like this faction, even though you've never heard of them before, they are being oppressed in Ethiopia. And it wouldn't have mattered. They could have chosen any region, right? As long as that they have a region that is like a little bit like not happy with the government, they can prey on those doubts and feed money into that doubt, and basically, like pulling on a string until that string pops and like they get the result that they want. That basically that little faction starts to realize like, okay, we have the backing of the Western powers. We can now start to raise our voice and make a bigger problem. This is generally how it works. I mean, it's not easy. Like, it's not hard for America to, with the media machine that they have, to make it look like any country in the world is oppressive in comparison to America. Because of course, in America, you have human rights, right? You have perfect human rights conditions. You don't, there's no such thing as Guantanamo Bay, or there's no issue with police brutality in the streets, and there's no issue with racism, there's no issue with anything in America. Only in other countries of the world are there issues with human rights. And the Western media does such a good job of making it look like everybody else in the world is backward and doesn't have the situation under control. And that's why we must come in and intervene and save these poor people from their own demise. And this is the narrative that plays on people's psychology. And it's that Western ego or misplacement of ego that is running astray, like on our part, and it's going to come like backfire on the Western part in a very demeaning and derogatory way, especially for Western people like myself. I feel the need to come onto shows like this and talk about this because as a Western man, we have to defend the true principles of our nations that are good, but they're just not acting for good these days. And they seem to, if anybody reads the American Constitution, it does not support the actions that the American government is taking right now in the policy of regime change in Ethiopia. It doesn't. It simply doesn't. And if Texas was to do the same thing tomorrow as the TPLF is doing in Ethiopia, you would see a completely different reaction from the United States government than the Ethiopian government. It'd be far more oppressive, and I'm sure there would be no discussion. So it's like I say, it's two-sided, two-faced. We come back to our original. It's the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde characterization of America. They have, and not just America, what America stands for, NATO as a military architecture. It's going to keep on using the same narrative until countries like Ethiopia and also Western people like myself stand up and say, no, it's time for this policy to change. It's time for people to fight back against this policy. And Ethiopia is doing a grand job. I salute you, sir. Like your country, thank God for your country, because right now it's the hope of Africa, and it is going to be successful in restoring its sovereignty.
For how long this trend will continue, the Western pressure on Africa's affairs will continue, and for the future, what should be the way forward for Africa and Africans in general? In what ways they should work and strengthen their unity to resist the current challenges, the current pressure on Africa?
Africa will be the wealthiest continent in the world when it realizes its own economic potential. There's no doubt about it. And anybody who studied the situation of what lies in the ground, the geological aspect of Africa from east to west and north to south. It is the richest parcel of land that we have on the planet. The only problem is all of the mining and all of the industry that takes place there is in the hands of Western powers. And because China brings a policy of development, building roads, bridges, trains, airports, energy infrastructure and whatnot, this lifts people out of poverty, which means that then people will have the money to go and buy back those resources that they lost so many hundreds of years ago. And this scares the West because, of course, when Africans become rich enough and wealthy enough to take back those resources, the West will lose a significant amount of economic power. I mean, you think of Britain, a tiny little island that had its whole empire, and remember where we got all of our resources from. It wasn't from that tiny little island sitting in the Atlantic. All of that gold that sits on our Queen's head came from one place and one place only. And I know where, Africa and India. And anybody who has anything to say about that can reach out to me via email, and I'd be more than happy to talk with them. But that is the situation, and it has been for 500 years, and it's about time that it changed.
Thank you very much for your time again.
Thank you so much for today. It's brilliant. And thank you for your interviews. It's a real pleasure being here and having the chance to talk with you. Thank you.
Dear viewers, this will bring us to the end of this edition.